The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. Last night I had the chance to speak with Anoa Changa and Wendi Muse, both of the Progressive Army. Wendi Muse is the host of the Left POC, Left People of Color podcast, and Anoa Changa, of course, political manager at the Progressive Army, and she's also the host of The Way with Anoa. We dug in deep into this ongoing controversy surrounding the idea that we as progressives should be just fine with making an alliance with people from the alt-right. Now, to most of you, just at the face of it, it is absurd because you understand what the alt-right represents. For others, they try to explain it away and say, well, no, they're not really alt-right, or no, they're not really that bad. And then you have Jimmy Dore, who he was on Katie Halper's podcast, and he made the case that, well, you know, we should be able to make this alliance because FDR made an alliance with Stalin. Along with a couple of other ridiculous arguments to support this. So there's not really a proper way to introduce this other than to say this. This is a fundamental split. And as I said over the summer, this is a parting of the ways. We cannot go forward with people who see absolutely nothing wrong with us making an alliance with an individual and individuals who would just as soon celebrate and joke and laugh about the death of young black children and youth at the hands of police officers as they would laugh about rape culture. This is not an exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. This is literally the individual who's at the core of this conversation, Mike Cernovich. So let's take a few minutes and listen in to the conversation that I had last night with Wendi Muse and Anoa Changa, both of the Progressive Army. So I'm here with Anoa Changa and Wendi Muse. Wendi Muse, of course, is of the Left POC podcast, the Left People of Color podcast. And everyone knows Anoa Changa of the Progressive Army and The Way with Anoa. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So let's start. I think a good place to start is with a quick overview of what happened this summer, what actually this is all about, or at least how we got here. And I will start by saying I'm Johnny come lately in terms of what happened in the summer. I noticed some brewings happening. I noticed some arguments happening, some conversations on Twitter happening. And once I finally got wind of it, the two of you had already been fully engaged in trying to stop this madness of aligning with people like Cernovich. And then it just kind of went from there and became this entire big brouhaha, for lack of a better phrase. Wendi, give your best elevator pitch, 30 seconds or 60-second summary of what happened this summer and how we got here.
Oh boy. So I would say around July, if not, mid to late July, early August of 2017, there was a blogger by the name of Caitlin Johnstone who had written a piece in which she argued that the left, in order to take down the deep state, to use her exact words, should build a media alliance with members of the alt-right, right, including people most notably in this case, like Mike Cernovich, who is, for those who don't know, what some call the alt-light, but he's a white supremacist. He's been accused of rape, and he's completely racist, and basically does what he can to create a media spectacle of his own on a regular basis for the sake of expanding his brand of white supremacy. So anyway, Caitlin had been tweeting at him and suggesting that they form an alliance of some sort in order to support some semblance of an anti-war movement, which they both claimed didn't exist in the United States, which on its face is untrue.
Anoa.
I mean, the problem when things happen in the Twitter sphere, right? You try to have very well-reasoned discourse, and people who follow Wendi know she does have very linear, clear, rational, conversations. And we were all engaged in such a discussion of I think it was the initial piece, or maybe it was the second piece, because there were two pieces concerned to this, and we were discussing them, and somehow, what really made it become this huge big thing was Caitlin came into our discussion space and was like, well, I'm here if you guys have questions. And so we were like, okay, cool. Glad you showed up, boo. Here's what our issues are. And she immediately shut down, claimed questions were violent and blocked. And the problem then becomes one of people with platforms, because she has access to multiple platforms. This isn't about, what was later characterized as us being jealous or hateful. This is about privilege in these media spaces with people with platform and access who are then able to, steer narratives. The same thing we're upset with the mainstream media with doing has been done in relation to this incident that happened, back in July. And it matters because we should not be misrepresenting what the objections are to people's work. And we cannot allow people to continue to move the goalposts. Accountability is crucial to the work that we're all trying to build and do.
Right.
So, like when we're having these dialogues and spaces and stuff, it's really important to keep all that in mind.
So let me hit a couple of high points here again, just to reiterate for the audience. There is a proposition, this long-standing proposition now that's been floating around the internet that in order to take on the deep state, and I say that mockingly because I'll unpack that in a minute, as well as to attack the media, because more than anything else, I don't really see them being anti-war, except, in name only. I don't really see them having any strategy to take on the deep state. I see them just being anti-media. And in order to promote this anti-media push, anti-deep state push, they wanted progressives to align with the alt-right white supremacists. And no matter how they try to explain it away and say, oh, they're not really alt-right, they're not really white supremacists, there's no redeeming value in Mike Cernovich, right? I think we should just put that out there, because he is a rape apologist. He makes jokes about rape. He's made jokes about the death of Trayvon Martin. I mean, he's literally out in these spaces advocating for things that are detrimental to us and to our lives. And the majority of the people that I've seen come at us about this have not, I would say 99% have not been people of color, which means they have absolutely zero skin in the game when it comes to aligning with people who would just as soon laugh about us being shot by the cops as they would anything else. So I just want to make sure that the audience is very clear on why we are so adamantly against this proposition. It has less to do with the individuals involved as much as what they're advocating for. And I think what they're advocating for is very dangerous. As much as we all walked away from this and we left it alone, we parted, I even titled the episode Parting of the Ways. Like, this is just a fundamental split. We'll go our own separate ways. But now it's got a whole brand new life to it because of a mutual friend. I think fondly of Katie Halper. She's been on my show. I've been on her show. I know you've been on her show and she's been on yours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she brought Jimmy Dore on her show and he reignited all of this because now he's advocating very vehemently against us, even though he wouldn't call us by name.
So Jimmy Dore has been on a Caitlin Johnson ride for a while. And I say she's been on a ride because she is a grifter, as is Mike Cernovich. So that's something else that's important to point out. Not only is the proposition or the proposal of making an alliance with white supremacists ridiculous on its face, but also the point that it's being made by someone who has the least best interests possible at heart for the left and for any sort of left progress politically going forward. Her own ideological inconsistency is very clear and worth pointing out. But I say all that to just mention the fact that she has a book out and she's been going on tours for several weeks now for alternative media sources, alternative left media sources to promote it. And so Jimmy Dore had her on recently.
I know you want to jump in there before we listen to some of the podcasts.
Yeah, there was a shift. There's been a more recent shift in what she's been doing because the other stuff didn't pan out. Because, there's stuff. There's been the claiming that Charlottesville was more of an issue because people decided to make a big deal about Nazis versus just really doing real work elsewhere. I mean, there's actually a problematic body of work that exists. But what I do think is really, critical in thinking about, folks don't even take the time to understand what the criticism is. Because one of the things that I think that we have done and we have tried, all of us have tried to do across our own commentary and the space that we've tried to carve out, over the past few years has been to actually understand our opposition, understand even detractors of those who we maybe kind of share space with, but don't really share space with, but to understand those counterpoints and be able to address them, right? Not just simply like, oh my God, they're just out to get us. Like, you sound like Hillary stands, seriously, as if there's no viable valid point being made. And that projection has continued to happen, and it ensued in the summertime, and it's bubbled up a few times since then. But the most recent, resurgence of this through this conversation, really completely disregarded not just the actual experiences of myself and Wendi that happened in a very public way, but
for months, by the way, for months.
It was a continuous thing for a long time. And that also just shows that people are just oblivious to what is happening outside of their own little bubbles.
Yeah.
But the way Jimmy talks about this is very clear that, privilege and platform take precedence over actual factual discussion.
Very true. Very true. Let's take a quick listen into the first clip from Katie Halper's podcast with Jimmy Dore.
This idea that you can't reach out to people who aren't already with you, that's just not how you win elections.
Well, can I tell you one of the most weirdest things I saw happen was, and I got to be honest, I didn't follow it closely when it was happening, but there's a woman named Caitlin Johnson. She's from Australia.
Oh, yeah.
She's really, she draws a lot of criticism.
Yeah.
She had recommended, she was anti-war, and I think this is how it went. She recommended working with that guy Mike Chernovich and some other right-wingers to end wars.
Yeah.
And everyone then said she's the worst person in the world and you can never listen to her.
Yeah.
And that's real easy to dismiss ideas that way.
The first thing, and I'm going to let you two have it actually, and you can run with it. But the first thing that jumps out to me is how simple he just says, well, we're going to join up with Mike Chernovich to end wars. Really? Like, all we have to do to solve the problem that has been plaguing humanity since we've been humans is to join up with Mike Chernovich. And I mean, to me, it becomes performative at that point. They're making this ideological goal that's unattainable, and they have everyone chasing this dragon because it really just sells clicks on their end, because they actually have no strategy whatsoever to even move the first step towards ending wars. It's just like a cliche. We're just going to join in with the alt-right and end wars. Wendi.
First of all, the alt-right is not interested in ending wars. They only focus on Syria for a reason. The reason of that is that they don't want the U.S. and Europe to become brown nations or multiracial spaces, right? Multiracial continents. And so their point here is to keep the European Union and the U.S. white. And so this is why they care about Syria, because this is where we've seen the largest influx of immigrants coming into the West from the fallout of that war. They do not care about U.S. intervention in any other spaces. Right. You don't hear them talking about what's going on in Venezuela, North Korea, anywhere else. And there's a reason for that. And so that reason is precisely a matter of white supremacy and not a matter of concern about immigrants, whom they hate, by the way, or Muslims, whom they also hate, by the way. And all of their language undergirds the things that keep war going and that sort of allow people to fall into the trap of supporting wars when we really shouldn't be. The second thing that's worth pointing out, too, is the simple fact that there is no point to alignment if there's nothing being done. And there are people on the left who are doing things against war, but you don't hear them calling for that kind of alliance. It's just sort of interesting and convenient that they want to ally with the alt-right, aka white supremacists, and not people who are already doing it.
And Anoa, before you jump in there, that point is so important. This weekend, we've seen almost like a juxtaposition between two versions of the anti-war left. You have the anti-war left that were slammed. A couple of them were slammed in a SLPC article, and there are people out there who are actually doing the work in a very substantive fashion, not only with their writing, but with their activism. But then you have what I call cosplayers left, the Jimmy Dores, who for them it's just a cliche, and they aren't actually doing anything moving towards that direction. And I just thought it was funny that this weekend we had both of them on display side by side, and one of them is actually doing something versus the others who have made it into just kind of a something that they can generate Patreon money off of. Go ahead, Noah.
No, I agree. And those distinctions that Wendi makes are very, very, necessary. And even just thinking about the starting point of this conversation with Katie saying, we don't win by not talking to people who don't think like us. That's also part of this. That's also problematic. There is some really great soundbitey type language that people like to repeat, but we're not really digging in and talking discussion. Like we're seeing that down here in Georgia right now, where you have people thinking they're going to reclaim the lost white vote, when historically in southern states, the Democratic Party is maybe getting a third of the white vote, and that's being generous, right? You're not going to somehow magically, after 20 years or more of losing people who continue to trend conservative and right on particular issues,
right.
You're not going to suddenly just come back because all of a sudden you have these magical progressive values. There, you may get an influx of voters who actually care about voting for something, but there's not going to be this big, massive wave. Like, let's just be real. Hate is on the ballot in many states across the country, including right here in Georgia. And, you know, that's just not going to change because we start taking the time to talk to the people who are already in the space, because y'all don't do that.
And who are already suffering too. I mean, it's weird that they're I'm not to say that there are not white people suffering, but my point here is that they're going after white people who are doing all right. Like last time I checked, Mike Cernovich is not on the welfare line. You know, he's doing okay. He's wealthy. And there are people that they're trying to court who are not only economically secure, but socially secure. Right. So why are they going for them and not people who are being hurt by austerity and racism? It's convenient.
Absolutely. And it's also it's a real misunderstanding and misrepresentation of what they're actually trying to do. Going to a Cernovich or a Sobiech, because even though she didn't mention him by name, she had tweets, though, when she was tweeting out her pieces when that was happening, in terms of Sobiech, Cernovich. She was begging Alex Jones to let her on a show and stuff like that. So, but the issue with Sobiech and Cernovich is when you look at the empires they've built around themselves, social media, they're trolls. They have these massive pro-Trump troll outlets that they have their own propaganda. They have their own misinformation campaigns. So one of my questions that still has not been answered by her or any of her supporters is, if you're saying that mainstream media is full of propaganda and misleads people, how do we address the issue of propaganda and misleading people by joining propagandists who mislead people? That literally makes no sense. These are people who do so much damage. These are people who are invested in keeping people dumb and uninformed, so they continue to vote against their interests in this way. We do not win by endorsing, supporting, and giving weight to bad information and grifters like Cernovich and Sobiech. But the difference is, though, they represent a particular segment. That's not the same thing as directly organizing and investing in talking to actual voters about issues. Those are not the same things at all, because they're not doing that. They're not supporting efforts that do that. They're the ones who run around talking about voter fraud and quote unquote illegal aliens voting in the millions. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's the type of nonsense that they will take part in. They're not actually going to folks in a West Virginia, for example, right, to talk about why we need to organize and get better people elected. That's not what they're doing.
Here's my question. After a year, and we're almost at a year now, of this proposal of teaming up with Cernoviches of the world, what have they accomplished? Because it's not as though we stopped them, right? We didn't stop them from teaming up with Cernovich. So what did they actually accomplish in this time? Like, did they speak to anyone? Were they in West Virginia with the teachers' protest strike recently? Because that's a perfect place to see the opportunity to connect with people who don't see eye to eye with you ideologically. What did they actually do? And the truth of the matter is, all I've seen that came out of this entire year is a book. That's the only thing that I've seen come out of this, is a book sale. Let's listen to this next clip by Katie and Jimmy Dore.
He is that way, right? Oh, and so when someone does that, who's a Hillary voter, I always tweet at them, because this happens on Twitter all the time, try to smear her like that. Oh, she's nuts or something. Right. And I'm like, first of all, she wanted to team up with right-wingers to end war. She didn't want to team up with right-wingers to go commit racism.
Right.
Holy snitch. That's got to be one of the dumbest. I mean,
I'm laughing. It's hard for me not to keep laughing as I'm trying to say this, but it's just ridiculous. I mean, first of all, no one, to the best of my knowledge, at least none of us, were calling Caitlyn crazy. None of us were using ableist language to refer to Caitlyn. All of us were debating her on the basis of the logic of her proposal and the ahistoricity of it. You know, I teach history and I'm studying history for a living. Like, that's my job as a PhD student and hopefully a professor one day. And trust me when I say that, you know, in history, these things don't work out. They've been proposed before over and over, and all they end up with is a lot of death and destruction and harm towards people who are already the most vulnerable. Yeah. So, you know, just to sort of lightly cover this as if we are somehow, you know, attacking Caitlyn or referring to her as crazy or saying that there's something wrong with her proposal because of a personal issue, right, and that we've ever proposed that she was going to go hang out with racists to do. spread racism, I think he said.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just absurd. And it's a complete distortion of what we were arguing. And I think that's very much by design.
Well, here's the thing too. Like, there are multiple people who, because the initial, there were multiple people who entered the fray. There are multiple people who wrote either Medium posts or actual articles about this. I mean, Ben Norton had something.
Yeah.
There was a wide range of people who responded initially when this came up and shot it down with very well-reasoned, responses. But her, people, they all made it into this, oh my God, they're out to destroy her. We actually even had comments on the page today about someone's trying to attack a female journalist, and I still,
because we're not female. Don't forget, we're not women at all.
My personal outrage still stems for the fact that she could not respond, and you guys know how I am with my commentary. She could not respond to several questions and claimed I was violent and misrepresenting her. I was asking the woman direct questions. The screenshots exist. You know what I'm saying? But to claim a Black woman is violent in the midst of us just merely communicating, we see the way that we are portrayed and misrepresented and disregarded blatantly. And folks can say, oh, it's just Twitter, oh, it's just this, but this is a part of a larger problem and pattern in society. It's also a part of the problem with her thinking and those of Jimmy Dore and people like them who think that, oh, but it makes sense to team up with racists because they're anti-war. You literally don't understand the issue then. Because it's not about being anti-war. Being anti-war is not enough. And if you're not anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and anti-militarist too, you're part of the problem.
Right.
And so you can't separate those things for them. You can't be anti-war and be a racist. Like, I'm sorry, you can't. Because the same war that we're saying that we're trying to anti-imperialism, whatever it is you're saying is the problem that we're doing abroad, is happening and being inflicted on communities of color, marginalized people right here in the United States of America. So if you don't care about that, you can't claim to be progressive. You can't claim to be on the right side of these issues. Like, you can't. And you can't say that you care about that stuff while you're saying, yeah, let's disregard the fact that this dude is cracking jokes about Trayvon Martin most likely deserving to die because he would have grown up to be a rapist anyway. I got a Black son. I don't find that type of stuff funny. People like him are dangerous to my child.
Absolutely. And you said something there. I'm going to skip around in the podcast because they actually did try to explain how it's okay to be anti-war first. And here's an explanation about that.
I think people portray it as a racist thing or as something that accepts racism. But if you're anti-racist, stopping war should be a big priority. Because the victims of wars are people of color.
That's how they explain it away, Anoa and Wendi. They say that, anti-war, you should be anti-war first because war affects people of color. Yes, that's true internationally. But like you said, Anoa, it hits home here. The police state and Black communities, there is a war happening right in our own Black communities.
Looking at what's happening with ICE here domestically, right? Like there is a war on people, marginalized communities right here at home. But let's just be real. Their logic don't even stand up in the real anti-war peace movement.
Right.
Let's just be real. Like, go talk to people with Answer, and Wendi can fill in even better on organizations. You got even Black Alliance for Peace, right? Like, go actually, because this actually was on the heels of the other incident with Claudia Stauber from Cabin Talk being mad that she didn't understand about anti-racism within the peace movement. Like, so there's a history of white people not understanding about being anti-racist within the peace movement itself, right? The anti-war movement, peace movement. Like, there is an issue, and there are plenty of people out there who can actually help educate and inform Jimmy Dore and Katie and other folks on these issues. I've talked about it with Eugene per year through his affiliation with Answer. Like, you guys can talk to Brian Becker. There's so many people out there that you all can talk to. These are people just off the top of my head that who've been doing this work. So that's the other thing, right? They're not involved in the anti-war movement. People might say that Caitlyn is not involved in the anti-war movement. You can say, because if she was, she would know who the players are, what the conversation topics are, and where people really actually do find value. I'm not going to say that there is never a time for me to talk to conservatives about something, but someone who's at the point where he's engaging in false information and fake news, and like for real fake news, there is no value in me doing anything with someone like a Cernovich. and to advocate, because we have a lot of people, unfortunately, who, because they came through a political process and they've been disenchanted and disinfected by the way things happen, who are looking for something. And unfortunately, they are being steered into certain places and certain silos. We need to set the bar high in terms of the type of information that's being given to folks so that they don't end up in some red-brown alliance nonsense or whatever, right? Like it's very dangerous what is happening, and what continues to happen by claiming like, oh, no one's saying that. And it's really disheartening when white progressives do stuff like this, because it's intellectually dishonest. And it's really dangerous for us.
It absolutely is dishonest intellectually. And I think, one of the main points here that's sort of missing is what seems to be their assumption that the anti-war movement does not also involve people from these other countries that are being bombed actively, and does not also involve people of color, right? They sort of make this very odd, they present this very odd argument that, like, if you're anti-racist, you have to be part of the anti-war movement, which itself is fine. But I think that then again sort of implies that people who are active parts of anti-war movements themselves are not people of color already, or people who are being targeted by, really predatory and terroristic U.S. foreign policy. I think the other thing here that's also odd is, like, we would never tell, for example, someone who's suffering in Syria under certain circumstances to align themselves with Al-Qaeda, right? Like, I can't imagine Katie or Jimmy or any of these people, H.A. Goodman or Caitlin, saying, hey, Syrians who are suffering under, wars and bombs from all sorts of parties from around the world, you guys should be friends with Al-Qaeda. Because, like, even though they're hurting you and even though they're physically harming you and, posing a threat to your lives, if you ally with them, then you can fight Russia or the U.S. or China or France, whoever is, bombing your neighborhood, right? No one's suggesting that is of this ilk, right? No one is saying that. And so why is the assumption then in the United States that we as people of color should put our actual lives in danger and our own livelihoods at risk, and not just on a personal level, but on a policy and an ideological level, that we should make these alliances and that they will somehow be fruitful for us? At the end of the day, the people whom they serve to benefit are the white supremacists. I really don't understand what the benefit would be for us if our anti-war movement is, again, supported, buttressed by these people who literally on a daily basis engage in the very racism that makes people who are Muslim, who are Arab, who are from all of these countries that we're actively engaging in bombing campaigns against, make them the enemy, right? How is it that we can sit here and say we can have an anti-war movement with people who are actively racist towards people of color, and therefore help not only give the rhetorical power, but even financial power in many cases to the very same politicians who are pushing go on those bombs.
But I do see how it could benefit people like H.A. Goodman and Caitlin in this case, because there's a threshold, there's a ceiling for their type of quote unquote progressivism, because their brand has a limit. They needed a new audience for them to be viable and for them to spread and go further. And so it makes total sense from that perspective. It makes absolute sense that they would want to get access to a similar audience on the other side of the aisle, the Cernovich audience. It makes total sense because it's a profitable move. In terms of being actual anti-war, it makes no sense whatsoever for every reason that both of you have outlined. And I think we just have to reiterate here at this point that we should all be clear that there's nothing anti-war about the alt-right, particularly Mike Cernovich and that entire ilk. They are 100% on board with any war that involves that has an anti-Muslim bent to it. They would 100% support that. Let's listen into the next clip.
It's just like, I don't know if FDR teamed up with Stalin to beat Hitler. Right. So this is politics makes strange bedfellows.
Yeah, I agree.
And
you're not
I always tweet at them a link to Hillary Clinton with Henry Kissinger, a bona fide war criminal. And you voted for her, right? So you'll vote for someone who hangs out with Mike Chernovich isn't a war criminal yet, as far as I can tell. He's done some despicable things. Yeah. But you're not allowed to work with him. But it's okay to work with Stalin, and it's okay to work with Henry Kissinger. Or how about, is it okay to work? Hey, by the way, George Bush is welcome back on daytime talk shows. The guy's a war criminal,
but an artist.
But somehow, Caitlin Johnson wanting to work with someone who's not a war criminal makes her toxic.
Well,
they're obviously pushing a official agenda.
Here's an idea. How about we work with neither, Jimmy? But anyways, so apparently every one of us voted for Hillary Clinton #1, which is a nice technique to get his audience, because there's nothing his audience hates more than Hillary Clinton. Like if you go to some of their timelines, they literally have in their bios that Hillary Clinton is the devil incarnate, right? So this is a great move, Jimmy. But actually, no, I'm going to pause. Wendi, take it.
Yeah. So yes, I am on the record for having voted for Jill Stein and would have technically voted for Gloria La Riva, who's a communist, if she had been on the ballot in Virginia. So let me just open by saying that. And then second of all, to be honest, this is obviously a huge straw man for him and operates as part of his little game of reducing any opponents, ideological or otherwise, in this reductive way of saying like, well, you guys are Democrats or liberals and you support Henry Kissinger, which is just absurd. I mean, literally, I every day I feel like I have a tweet that's against U.S. foreign policy and the current way it stands and the way it's operated throughout history. Mm-hmm. And so just the audacity that he has here to sort of, again, minimize our arguments and also not even to consider the fact that those of us who are making these arguments against Caitlin's proposal are also directly affected by U.S. foreign policy. I have family who lives in Turkey. My husband is Turkish. I have family and friends who live in other parts of the world. I have colleagues, students, everyone who are from other parts of the world. So it's very real for me. And I don't see it as some sort of game. So when I'm saying that I'm against the way U.S. foreign policy stands today, I'm serious about it. And it's not some sort of thing that I'm doing to get clicks or something that I think is, again, it's not because of Hillary Clinton fandom that I care about having an anti-war stance.
Anoa.
I agree absolutely with Wendi. I'd like safer relationships because I have a kid that wants to go abroad. I don't know, but the audacity and ditto on the voting. But you know what? So what? If I were, as a Black woman in America, were to vote for the quote unquote lesser of two evils, you know what? Right. So what? And I'm tired of all the damn virtue signaling with white progressives around how people of color vote. Like it's just like Democrats are not entitled to us, to our person. You don't own us, right? You don't own our votes. There are people who vote the way they do because that is what they've done historically, because that is how they have tried to save themselves. Now, whether you want to build a better alternative, go for it. You know what I'm saying? Do it. But otherwise, I'm tired of people dogging folks for voting for Democrats. Like, I'm really tired of it. I agree with the criticism and critique that we have of the Democratic Party and with Democratic candidates. I absolutely agree with it. A lot of it, I've said myself. However, I do not see the value in demonizing a voting population that you actually need, that your boy lost because he couldn't actually win. Let's just be real. That's the first thing. Second of all, in terms of Jimmy's stuff, like what Jimmy's thing is, again, Jimmy can't make an honest intellectual comments that is actually informed on the topic. So he has to yell and curse and excite and deflect in order to still be relevant. And that's his shtick. And that's really problematic in this space. But the issue in terms of, even the stuff about, well, she's not trying to be racist. We're really quick and everyone want to share the reports, the piece that came out a couple of days ago about liberals and their racism. Hi, progressives, you have it too.
If you disagree, if you say to Caitlin Johnston that's not a good tactic, but I don't think it's fair the way they're like, no, you're a terrible racist person. You court racism. Yeah, like it or not. Look, Marcus Garvey worked and the KKK both wanted to send Black people back to Africa for different reasons. But Marcus Garvey, who is like a Black separatist, the KKK, they politics, as you said, make strange bedfellows.
Anoa.
No, I really hate when people use the term Black separatism because it's not the same thing as white people wanting a white nation. It really is not. And like when you look at the SPLC and the way it has different movements and groups categorized, it even the same thing with the FBI, right? You have white nationalists, white supremacists, you have, now Black identity extremists. It's not the same thing. It does not have the same relationship, context, and power dynamic. Like that is just such a disingenuous conversation. And even going back to Jimmy Dore's assertion about Stalin and FDR in some international battle and having alliances to end wars. It wasn't that they were anti-war. Let's be clear about that. They were trying to bring a war to an end. Those are not the same thing. 2, FDR was not some great anti-racist. Like that's
let's be clear.
The comparison. And then even the one about Hillary Clinton and Henry Kissinger, you're talking to people who aren't anti-war. So what are you talking about? Like that don't even matter. Like y'all just like trying out stuff about Hillary Clinton because it's convenient.
Right. It plays to their audience.
Bernie Sanders is not anti-war.
Right. At this point, I mean, Wendi, and I want to toss it to you because I wanted to finish addressing that clip, which she brought up Marcus Garvey, and I'm like, wait a minute, stop throwing out black folks like your personal tools, right? You know, particularly when you don't even understand the context. And I'm tired of talking about it.
Can we just pour one out for Marcus Garvey's memory and history that was just savagely beaten down in this clip?
Oh my God!
Absolutely.
First of all, it's ironic because just this past semester I taught a class where we talked about Garvey quite a bit, and these are undergrads, right? So they're like 18, 19 years old. We read several books that dealt with Garvey and Garveyism and the UNIA, which is the organization that he ran. And, you know, he was a complicated man. He had politics that were all over the place. But at the heart of what he was doing throughout the Americas, so not just the United States, but in Latin America, Cuba, and in this, Central America, in the Caribbean, what he was doing was really trying to instill, first of all, a Black pride and self-worth in people of African descent who had been just coming out of slavery, 30, 40, 50 years at most. And we're really suffering under the yoke of white supremacy and capitalism at one of its major heights as the U.S. and it's in particular was expanding into the world. And so it's just ridiculous to me that what he was advocating for can be reduced to anything comparable to what Caitlin Johnstone is doing.
That's so insulting. I just have to reiterate, that was so insulting. I think that was the most disgusting part of the interview for me. Go ahead, Wendi.
It really was. And then second of all, I think what's important to note is that, again, Marcus Garvey was not interested in making concessions to white supremacists. He wasn't an astrologer who was a Johnny-come-lately about anti-war and trying to get clicks for his website or his books, if you want to call them that. He literally was not doing that. He was fighting for Black liberation and freedom from white supremacy. And yes, some of his methods were not my cup of tea.
Right.
I think, but the main thing that he was doing and why he was meeting with white supremacists at this one moment in history is because he supported expatriation, which for those who don't know is literally moving from the United States to Africa, because he believed that Africa was Black Americans and homeland,
right,
and where they belonged and where they would be treated with fairness. And so, in order to get people on board with that, he knew that he's in the middle of a massive height of white supremacy. People are being lynched, literally being killed for being Black on a regular basis at this time. He's operating in the 1910s, 1920s, So I just think it's absurd to suggest that a man who's fighting for the survival of people like him is somehow on par with making concessions for working with, hanging out with, tweeting, retweeting, communicating, and propping up white supremacists, because that's absolutely not what he was doing. If anything, he was playing white supremacists for fools, because he said, look, I'm going to take your racism and I'm going to say, what can I get out of what's the minute thing that I can get out of your racism? And what I can get out of it is the vote that I need, the legislation that I need to free my people. So I just think that this was a step too far. And I would highly suggest there are several authors for those who might be interested that I can offer if they want to really read about Marcus Garvey and avoid this kind of distortion of actual history of someone who was fighting for our rights.
All right, last clip, and then we're out of here.
Well, I just want to add real quickly, too, just even taking it back a few decades prior to Garvey. And expatriation is an old concept that goes back to the early 1800s. I mean, that was also a big debate between Martin R. Delaney and Frederick Douglass, right? I mean, when you look at what had already been happening before the end of slavery, when you look at the conversation of what to do once slaves were even freed. That was something that was being discussed for quite some time. And like you both pointed out, even today now, still, we are still dealing with white supremacists and negotiating the terms in which within which we're able to occupy space. Because if I have to go to Chuck Schumer to talk about what the terms of liberation are going to be, whether we're talking about dreamers or some other aspect of society, I'm talking to a white supremacist. We just heard him at APAC last week. That is white supremacists speak. So we're still negotiating. White supremacy is a spectrum. It's not some finite space that only some people in the society are at. White supremacy is the foundation of the nation that we live in. It's a spectrum. And we need to stop acting like, yes, the alt-right, but we are, there are levels of negotiation that we are being forced with people on a regular basis. And we are being forced to put our blackness aside. We are being forced to put our humanity aside in a lot of these scenarios, even in leftist, progressive, liberal, whatever spaces, we're being asked to, no, just wait. Let's not have this conversation right now because it makes us uncomfortable. So let's just be real about that. And when we're looking at these conversations, like it's not about disagreeing. And this is something that Wendi made a really good point of. This is not something that we needed to debate. This is not a conversation. My humanity is what it is. It's not up for conversation. This is why I'm not a free speech absolutist either, because we're not going to pretend like protecting the rights and opportunity for this one extreme group of people is going to trickle down to the rest of us, because it does not, because of platform and privilege. It is not. If you're complaining about free speech, that someone's trying to restrict your free speech and you're on a major platform, you don't have a free speech issue.
All right. One final clip.
And you know what? I honestly, I should probably come out on that issue. I've been cowardly on that.
I mean, when I found out what it was about, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, hey, I could disagree with her on this tactic. Doesn't make her a freaking idiot. It doesn't make it means I disagree with this tactic, or I agree with it. I wouldn't work with those guys, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't or shouldn't.
But for the people on the left, I think it's purity politics. Honestly, I do, which is what they.
I think it's people wanted to dismiss anti-war voices.
Even leftist anti-war people?
Well, I don't know. There's some people way left also that issued on her over it. And
no, that's what I'm saying. And I think that's
that's just people getting caught up wanting to hate.
Wendi, go.
So I just think it's really important for us to put on the table, first and foremost, that it's not purity politics to demand recognition of our humanity, right? And it's not up for debate, as we've said over and over. I think to frame this as a matter of two sides or something worth discussing,
right,
or something worth debating, then reduces the situation to a matter of opinion, which is exactly what Jimmy Dore says.
Right.
And last time I checked, my right to exist is not not an opinion. It's literally a recognition of my being a human being. And so I think it's really important that we not get caught up in this, because this is, again, a moving of the goalposts, right? It is a placement of these really important questions on the left about the space that we provide and recognize for people of color as, again, usually the most vulnerable within our spaces, within the United States, within the world. It's kind of absurd to have any semblance of a leftist movement, and most certainly a radical leftist movement, that thinks of Black people as an afterthought, or that thinks of people of color as something that, we can deal with later. We'll just brush it under the carpet for now, brush it under the rug for now, and address it at a later date. So I think it's the only word I can think for it is absurd that he makes these claims.
Anoa.
I live in Atlanta. I'm in a city that's too busy to hate. Okay. I don't have time literally to hate people.
Right.
There's too much work. There's too much to be done. And, Black don't crack because we don't be worried about, nonsense like this. If you're going to be petty with a purpose. And quite honestly, this is just reckless indifference for the facts, people's actual life and experience. And just like Wendi said, our existence, our humanity, it's not an opinion to debate. That's why they're okay with joining the alt-right, because our existence is debatable to them. It's not to us. And we're not going to cede ground on that. And I think, being a good ally, this is also the reason why I hate the term ally. We need comrades. We need people who are really willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, and it should not be an afterthought that I have to point it out to you.
Right.
That something I explained to you, which you clearly didn't pay attention to, that you then are now contributing to the re-marginalization of my voice.
Yeah. At some point, there should be a very clear delineation on certain issues. And this is one that I'm not afraid. I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt that the people who disagree with us, they're going to dismiss this as nothing more than identity politics. And they're going to use that as a cliche to just erase everything that we said, every logical argument against it, every piece of evidence that we've offered. They're going to minimize it and say it's nothing but identity politics. And that's a shame because, aren't they supposed to be the progressive ones?
On that note, I just wanted to add one other thing. I think that what's missing here is a real discussion, too, about if you want to build out a left, why are you putting people in a position where they are feeling like their humanity is being questioned, right? And I think that in some ways, we're talking about how we need allies or how we need comrades or whatever, but it also feels like in these spaces as of late that there's like a ticking clock until the next person turns into a supporter of the alt-right or an apologist for the alt-right, or someone who decides that thinking about, people of color, immigrants, Muslims, whatever, is something that's not worth discussing. And we've seen so many people fall, right? We saw Cassandra Fairbanks, who was a Bernie Sanders supporter. We saw Caitlin Johnstone, who professed to be a Bernie supporter for a long time. We saw Jimmy Dore kind of make this switch by at least enabling people like Johnstone and others. And I think that there's a real concern on my end, at least, about what that means in terms of also adding people who are sort of on the fence into building out the movement. So how am I, I'm going to look like I've lost it if I go up to a Black person or a Hispanic person or whatever, and I'm like, listen, there's this thing called socialism, or this thing called progressivism. But right now, the people at the helm who are making the most noise want us to ally with the alt-right. What am I going to, I'm going to look like a fool, right? Yeah. So I think it's really important, even if it's not about the personal, even if it's not about how I feel, it's also important if you really want the left to win, and if you want socialism to have any chance at all in the United States, then it can't be done as an all-white movement, and it certainly can't be done as an alt-right movement.
I love that.
Yeah.
One of the things, too, that I think is really important to point out is the fact that, there's no such thing as an innocent bystander. And in this case, Katie, unfortunately, is saying that at a time when it was really important to have voices like hers, people with really rather large platforms, to say, look, we shouldn't be aligning ourselves with the alt-right, or this proposal is dead on arrival. She was silent. And she notes here that she found people like me, like Anoa, like many, 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 many others who'd written articles, who talked on podcasts, who tweeted, who commented elsewhere, that our opinions and our well-researched points were not valid enough, I guess, for her to see as reasonable points against what Johnstone was proposing. And she decided to stay silent, and now is sort of misrepresenting what we said as irrational and unreasonable, or even sort of an attack on Johnstone. It just sort of makes you feel like you can't. I mean, I hate to say this, but it really it makes the situation sort of feel like, who can we turn to and trust to have our backs when we really do need people to stand up for what's right on the left or on the progressive
left. I agree, because I think that Wendi raised a good point when you're talking about allies and comrades, and also space. And there has been this whole thing recently. There have been these flurry of articles not too long ago about, young white men in progressive and left spaces feeling alienated and turning to the alt-right. Here's the real problem. Not that we're going to lose people. We need to figure out how to keep them. But what are you doing that's so wrong, and who you're recruiting into these spaces to begin with, that they could be so easily, what could you actually be swayed by with their pseudo populism on the alt-right? What could you actually be swayed by? So I'm not really motivated to find common ground with people who don't believe I should exist, right? Yep. Who would make jokes of my son getting murdered by the police. I find no value in that. But what's even worse, because quite honestly, those are people that I usually don't have to interact with in my days, right? Most of us are not facing virulent racists in the day-to-day. We are facing a system that is deeply entrenched in white supremacy and systemic racism and oppression across so many different isms and issues, right? What we have is, when we have misrepresentation of ideas, of information. For people with large platforms, there's privilege in their large platforms. They're informing tens of thousands of people, both of them combined, possibly even hundreds of thousands of people, possibly even, right, depending upon reach.
Right.
And it's just like, that is so dangerous and detrimental to our ability to build viable alternatives that are inclusive and representative for the 99%, not just the 90 white percent. And it's really a problem. And I have such a huge issue with the way that we have to tiptoe around white progressives and their feelings and the I didn't realize is. Like, I appreciate the fact that once she became aware, at least from her communication, I appreciate the fact that, you know, Katie reached out to apologize, but it really bothers me that there was not the concern on the front end or at any point before that podcast went up for the veracity of the information. Because that was, even if there was a particular brand of people they were talking about, that does not come across in that podcast. It shouldn't matter the size of the platform. It shouldn't matter the voice of the person. Well-reasoned logic is well-reasoned logic. Like, and to act as if somehow, you know, Caitlyn, because whatever, I don't know what she's been doing for these people. I guess she helped them get clicks or what. Like, I was amazed I was, you know this, and I know I wasn't going to get emotional about this, but I was so hurt by the way Tim flipped on me in particular, but on both of us, but me in particular. I was very hurt by that. I was very hurt by what Katie did as well, because it's just like, you all just completely disregard us and don't even consider the fact that there is something else besides whatever clicks you need for your Patreon or your subscribers. Like, I get that for people that this is their livelihood, but at the same time, these are our lives. When your livelihood is someone else's life, you really do have to have certain considerations if you're saying that you have the personal values that you do.
Wow. Wendi, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like, a lot of people talk about drawing lines in the sand, and I feel like I draw my line in the sand and then I coat it with tire fires, right? I'm really personally not interested in this damage control campaign that some people have led following the fallout on this front, because they should have known better to begin with. So I just want to start by saying that. And then secondly, I think that what we have here fundamentally is a problem, first of all, of not being listened to precisely for what we often talk about as like the black tax, right? So I think that, you know, people who don't have degrees, who just say stuff out of their, you know what, make things up, don't have any fact-based points, nothing. They just, you know, like wax poetic about nonsense. And then they get major platforms. They get supported by others who have major platforms. And then you have people who are of color who are supposedly your friends or your colleagues, and you're pointing things out to the same people and you're being ignored. So it's like, we can put in 150%, 200%, and our voices don't matter to people, because at the end of the day, their whiteness and their shared whiteness is more important than anything we have to say. So I think that that's a huge problem, that it has a long way to go. And this is not to diss all people on the left either. There are some really solid people who are much further to the left than any of these Bernie aggressives are, who are really down, and they're white. And I don't want to paint, and not all white people, right? I don't want to paint every white person and every white person on the left with the same brush. But I think there is a problem when people's left politics, or I should say progressive politics, are solely wrapped up in Bernie Sanders. There's more to the left than Bernie Sanders. There's far more on the left side, like beyond Bernie Sanders. There's politics beyond Bernie Sanders. And I think that sometimes people who've based all of their political identity around this one man, or around this one political moment in American history during the primaries, and who are stuck there, are not helping the left progress. And I think that they're holding us back. And I think that there's something that has to be done to break up that flow, or at least to stop listening to these people and seeing them as leaders, as a political voice, when we need to start building out spaces of people who are already on board or who are close by, and that we can really fortify as a group, and not just reaching out, you know, to people who want nothing more than to destroy the left and to destroy us as people.
Wow. Wendi, tell everyone how to get up with you.
Sure. So they can reach me on Twitter at Muse Wendi, and that's MuseWendi, or they can find more about the histories of leftists of color by going to @LeftPOC. And
Anoa Changa, tell everyone how to get up with you.
Well, when my Twitter ban is removed, you can find me on Twitter at The Way with Anoa. And I recently, upon Ben's suggestion, changed my Facebook name to my name, Anoa Changa. So you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is also The Way with Anoa. definitely, connect. And for everyone, like, well, are you online? Yeah, Ben and I have the same exact platform. So I'm on YouTube, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio.
Again, a special thanks to Anoa Changa and Wendi Muse for spending that much time with me last night. The bad thing about this is that you either see it or you don't, right? There's some of you who probably did not even need this conversation because you already get it. It's at face value. You understand how absurd it is for people to be explaining away the very insidious behavior that is detrimental to people of color, both here in the United States, but abroad as well, that you find in alt-right circles who use the language of anti-war when they're nothing remotely close to being anti-war. They're just anti-interventionist wars that would create a refugee problem that would increase the browning or speed up the browning of America. But for some of you, and I thank those of you who simply see it, you see it at face value. You didn't need any of this. But then still there's an entire group of people who would call themselves our allies, who think that we're just completely out in left field, that we're playing identity politics. I want to refer those of you who think that to my podcast last week about identity politics. And I also want to say this: bye. So long. Auf Wiedersehen. We really don't want any parts of you in that regard. Have a wonderful political life over there in that field. We give you that. You are free to go. You don't have to worry about our politics. You don't have to worry about the Progressive Army, because it's almost like we're talking to far right wing conservatives. Why would we even argue with them when we know that there's a fundamental difference between us, and they don't want to see the world through our lens. They don't want to take into consideration the world through our lens. In fact, they find joy in reveling in the pain that we exist in this country. So since it's so similar to that, honestly, this is my last time talking about it. And I'm going to direct Progressive Army to not even write about it anymore. As much as possible. I'm not a dictator there. I can't make that call by myself, but I'm going to give a strong recommendation that we 100% cede this territory to those people who want to live and ally with the Cernoviches of the world in order to take on the amorphous deep state, the boogeyman, right? You guys can have it. And I would just check in about another year to see what progress you've made. And who's actually been strengthened. Has your anti-war movement been strengthened? Or has the anti-deep state movement been strengthened? Or in reality, did you do nothing more but strengthen the platform of racists who really would revel in the pain of people you once called allies? But between now and that year, I'm done with it. Folks, thanks so much for hanging out with me. We are well over time, but it was a much needed conversation. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.